It was a Memorial Day weekend, and my group of friends decided to rent a secluded lakefront house in North Carolina. A 3 hours drive from home. The property was a steal because it was in the middle of nowhere. The group included Jamie, Crystal, Rich, Adam, and me. We piled into Adam's truck, excited for what we hoped would be a perfect weekend getaway. I had found a place on an Airbnb, and the big deck with a hot tub overlooking the lake was the highlight. When we arrived, the house was as picturesque as advertised, with a gravel driveway cutting through the woods, leading up to a spacious wraparound deck. The deck's view of the serene lake was stunning. We quickly unpacked, cracked open some beers, and dove into the weekend's festivities with beer pong, cornhole, and barbecue. We were loud, but with no apparent neighbors for miles. We didn't think it would be an issue. As night fell, we gathered around the fire pit, but our evening was interrupted by a woman's voice coming from the edge of the woods. She was a middle-aged woman with short hair, and she was yelling at us to turn down the music. Her rant was full of complaints about out-of-towners like us who polluted the lake and made too much noise. After her tirade, she abruptly walked back into the dark woods. We tried to laugh off the strange encounter, but it did cast a slight shadow over our carefree mood. Later, when we were enjoying the fire pit, the music suddenly stopped and a voice called out from the lake. It was a plea for help. My heart raced as I looked out at the pitch-black water. Adam and I grabbed a kayak and paddled towards the source of the cries. But as we rowed deeper into the lake, the calls seemed to fade away into the void. Panic set in as the once urgent cries were replaced by distant guttural screams from the direction of the house. We paddled frantically back to the shore, only to find the house eerily empty. Our friends, Jamie, Crystal, Rich, and others, were nowhere to be found. The truck was still parked outside, and our phones had no signals at all. And desperately we drove up the road to find the nearest house, hoping for help. We arrived at a neighboring property with its lights on and rang the doorbell repeatedly. Through the window, we saw the same woman who had yelled at us earlier, standing motionless in the living room, her expression unbearable and menacing. Terrified, we abandoned the house and we were about to leave when my phone vibrated. It was Rich calling with a frantic message. 2 men with axes, wearing masks, were emerging from the woods and approaching them. The girls were screaming, and Rich was on the phone with 911. The call ended abruptly, leaving us in a state of sheer panic. We waited anxiously on the side of the road until we saw the flashing lights of police cars. We led them back to our friends, who emerged from the woods, shaken but unharmed. The police conducted a search of the cabin, but there was no sign of any break-in or the men with axes. Even the cries for help in the lake seemed to have vanished into thin air. We packed up and left immediately, our nerves frayed and our trust in remote getaways shattered. Despite our efforts to get a refund from Airbnb, we only recovered part of our money. The experience left us with more questions than answers. Were we lured into a trap? Was the woman involved somehow? The terror of that night left a permanent mark on us, and none of us have ventured into such isolated places again. The memory of that night remains a haunting reminder of how quickly a perfect weekend can turn into a nightmare. It was a Memorial Day weekend of 2021, and the world was just beginning to emerge from the grip of COVID-19. People were eager to celebrate, and my friends and I were no exception. Our friend Jacob, who had the fortune of being born into wealth, had access to a luxurious boat that belonged to his dad. We were all set for a day on the water. Jacob's house was right on the bay, so our core group, Tony, Mikey, and I, met there and took the boat out to join a huge boat gathering. The bay was filled with boats, tied together in a makeshift flotilla, and people were hopping from vessel to vessel, enjoying drinks in the sun. We were all drinking heavily, including Jacob, who unfortunately had more than his fair share. As the sun began to set and the boats started to leave, it became apparent that Jacob was too intoxicated to safely operate the boat. I suggested he take a nap in the cabin, while the rest of us tried to buy time. The hours ticked by slowly, and by the time Jacob finally woke up, he seemed a bit more sober. We decided to head back, but as we navigated the bay, we noticed a boat trailing us. Jacob's anxiety spiked as we feared it was the bay police. He was careful not to speed or slow down, trying to avoid drawing any attention as we entered the canal leading to his house. The mysterious boat followed us in. Jacob's nerves were on edge, worrying about a potential DUI and the wrath of his father. The canal was no wake zone, so we had to slow down even more. The boat behind us drew closer, and we braced ourselves for an encounter with law enforcement. But as the boat passed us, we realized it wasn't the police at all. It was just a random boat, and the 3 men on board were staring at us with an unsettling intensity. Jacob, still on edge, couldn't help but taunt them, but they didn't respond. We all felt a growing sense of unease as the men continued to watch us until their boat vanished into the night. We tied up the boat at Jacob's dock and we went inside his house. With his parents away, we considered throwing a last-minute pool party, but by then it was too late. Instead, we decided to chill by the pool and continue drinking. Within minutes, the same boat cruised by again. The men on board gave us the same intense stare, and at this time, Jacob said nothing. The night grew darker and my memory became increasingly hazy. I must have blacked out because the next thing I remember was waking up with a severe cotton mouth in the middle of the night. My thirst was unbearable, and as I staggered into the kitchen to drink from the faucet, I was met with a chilling sight. A man in a classic black robbery outfit, complete with a ski mask, stood there, brandishing a gun. The terror I felt was overwhelming. Every fiber of my being was screaming in silent panic. The man ordered me to stay quiet and asked where the owner of the house was. My voice trembled as I told him I didn't know. He demanded to know the location of the owner's bedroom. I pointed upstairs, and he forced me to lead him up with the gun pressed against my back. As we reached the top of the stairs, I realized there were 2 men, not just one, both clad in the same intimidating attire. They followed me into Jacob's room, where he was asleep. The men bragged in and woke him up, their guns pointed menacingly. They demanded to know where the safe was. Jacob was absolutely terrified. Guided them to his father's room. The men forced him to call his dad to get the combination. With Jacob's dad on the line, he reluctantly provided the code. The intruders rifled through the safe, taking cash, jewelry, saving bonds, and important documents before fleeing the house. We didn't hear any vehicle leaving, suggesting they had parked far away. Despite extensive efforts to alert the community and local authorities, no one could identify the thieves. It became clear that the men on the boat had followed us to locate Jacob's house, spotting a potential target for their heist. That night remains one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. I could have been killed with a single wrong move. The fear and adrenaline from that night still haunts me, and I can't shake the feeling that those men were dangerously close to a far worse outcome. Growing up in rural Michigan, life was often a monotonous cycle of staring at trees and crops. My parents sold their property 5 years ago, but I still remember it vividly. It was a sprawling 3-acre lot with a large house and a storage building out back. When I was 13 years old, I was often left alone at home. I had earned my parents' trust due to my maturity and responsibility. One weekend, while I was immersed in a game of Vice City on my PS2, a sudden loud metallic bang jolted me from my concentration. My heart was racing all of a sudden, and I darted to every window to see what was happening, but I saw nothing until I reached the window overlooking the storage building. The door to the building was wide open. Instinctively, I grabbed the rifle from the closet and went outside, shouting into the night, "Who's there?" The darkness swallowed my voice, and there was no reply at all. I approached the door and announced that I had a gun before peeking inside. The cluttered interior, lawn equipment, a quad, and other tools could easily conceal someone. Even though I was brave for my age, the sight of the open door and the possibility of someone hiding inside sent shivers down my spine. I decided to lock the door and retreat inside the house, where I sat by the window, my gaze fixed on the storage building. The door was heavy. It couldn't have just swung open by itself. Someone had definitely opened it. I tried calling my dad, but reached his voicemail. Around that time, it was the era before texting became the norm, so leaving a message was literally my only option. As the minutes ticked by, I heard creaks from upstairs. My heart pounded in my chest. Was it my imagination, or was someone truly in the house? Determined to protect my home, I grabbed the rifle again and cautiously made my way upstairs. where I found 5 doors, 4 leading to the bedrooms and 1 to the bathroom. I knelt down on my knees to peer through the crack under the door to my parents' room and saw 2 bare feet facing away from me. The gravity of the situation hit me hard. I wasn't prepared to confront or worse, shoot someone. Panicking, I rushed back downstairs and hid in the bathroom. Desperately, I called 911, whispering every detail of the situation. The operator instructed me to stay silent and remain hidden. I heard footsteps approaching the bathroom door, stopping just outside. A deep voice broke the silence, saying, "What's up, kid?" The chilling tone is etched in my memory. Even now, I can recall it vividly. Summoning every ounce of courage, I responded loudly, "I'm on the phone with the cops right now, and they have a gun." I put the operator on speakerphone. When the intruder tried the door and found it locked, I heard him walk away, followed by the sound of the back door slamming shut. My body relaxed slightly as I waited for the police to arrive. When they finally came, I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders. After a thorough search of the house, they confirmed the intruder was gone. They asked if I had somewhere to stay, and I decided to go to my uncle's house. He came over, spoke with the police, and then took me to his home. The most haunting part of this experience is the fact that it was my own mistake that let the intruder in. I had left the door unlocked while investigating the noise. Despite holding a rifle, I felt completely vulnerable. It was truly the most terrifying experience of my life. A stark reminder of how quickly things can go wrong and how crucial it is to always be prepared. When I was 18, my parents went away for a week-long anniversary trip, leaving me in charge of the house. My sister had already moved out, so I was alone on our isolated property, surrounded by dense woods and accessed by a dirt driveway that led to a quiet back road. The road was flanked by large properties spaced far apart, giving it a deserted feel. In our small town, everyone knew each other, and familiar faces were a common sight, whether at the gas station, grocery store, or local bars, which I had just started visiting a few years later. One evening, while my parents were away, I stopped at the gas station to fill up my car. A black Jeep Cherokee pulled up next to me, and a man with a goatee emerged. He greeted me warmly and began filling his tank. In our small town, it was pretty normal for strangers to strike up a conversation, so I didn't think much of it. When he approached me and asked for directions to the interstate, I helped him out, noting that he scribbled the directions down on a notepad rather than using his phone, which struck me as odd. He thanked me and inquired if I was from the area. I told him I had grown up there, and he mentioned he was from out of town but didn't specify where. After he finished filling up his tank and returned the nozzle, he asked my name. I told him Kate, and he complimented my name before getting back into his Jeep. I drove off first, turning left to head back home. As I approached the driveway to our property, I noticed a black Jeep Cherokee following me. He passed by as I turned into the driveway, heading in the opposite direction from where I had directed him. At first, I thought he might have simply made a wrong turn, but unease began to set in. Later that night, as I was preparing to go out with friends, I heard footsteps nearby. Since the house was surrounded by woods, it could have been any number of animals, so I ignored it and left. However, when I returned home later and was walking from my car to the house, a man's voice called out from the darkness, "Kate!" A chill ran down my spine as I rushed inside and locked the door behind me. I called my parents, who reassured me it was probably just a neighbor. I didn't mention the gas station encounter, but the next day, as I was getting ready to go out again, I heard that same unsettling call, "Kate!" And that one was coming from a distance this time. I was panicked, and I ran back inside, locked the door, and called 911. The police arrived, searched the property, and advised me to call if the situation continued. The police presence did little to ease my anxiety. I stayed inside until the next day when I had to go to work. Leaving in broad daylight gave me some relief, and thankfully, I didn't hear the voice again. But as I came home that evening, ready to collapse into bed, the terrifying voice rang out once more from the woods, saying, "Kate, never call the cops on me again, cutie." I screamed in terror and quickly got inside, calling the police once more. They came and searched the property again, and my parents suggested I stay at a friend's house for the night. I agreed, and my friend Alex offered me a place to stay. As I prepared to leave, I made sure the house was secure. However, I was about to drive away. I saw a man in a face mask outside, trying to open my car door. My heart raced as I fumbled with the ignition and sped away. I drove to Alex's house in a state of panic, crying the entire way. Alex's dad was ready to help, and together we called the police again. An officer came to Alex's house to take my statement, while others checked my parents' property once more. My parents returned the next day, and I finally felt safe again. I was convinced that the man from the gas station had followed me home, scoped out the property, and began his disturbing campaign of intimidation. This horrifying experience was a major factor in my decision to move out into my own apartment a few months later. Some people are truly dangerous and have far too much time on their hands. One night when I was around 15 or 16 years old, I found myself alone at home for reasons I can't quite recall. My entire family was away, and I was deeply engrossed in a marathon session of the StarCraft. It was a game that I was obsessed with. The thrill of battling opponents online kept me glued to my computer. With the whole house eerily silent except for the occasional clack of my keyboard, suddenly the doorbell rang twice. Annoyed at the interruption, I reluctantly left my game and hurried to the front door. I said, "Who's there?" as I always did when I was alone. A faint, tremulous voice on the other side responded, but I couldn't quite make out what it was saying. It sounded like an older woman though. I opened the door slightly, with the storm door still closed, and saw a woman with a warm white smile. Her hands were hidden behind her back, and she asked if she could come in to use the phone. I had been taught never to let strangers into my house, regardless of their appearance or pleas. Even though it was clear that the library a few blocks away was closed, I directed her there, hoping she'd leave. Her smile remained unchanged, but her tone grew sharper. Then all of a sudden she started saying it's very rude to turn away an old lady asking for help. Her words, combined with the unsettling smile, sent shivers down my spine. I slowly began to close the door, mumbling apologies, but she just stood there, her eerie grin fixed on her face. Back inside, I tried to shake off the weird encounter and return to my game, but then I heard a faint clinking sound coming from my window, a metallic tapping that was impossible to ignore. The window right in front of my desk was covered by a blind, so I couldn't see what was making the noise, but the thought that it might be the woman from the front door made my heart race. I turned off the sound on my computer, completely losing interest in my game. The tapping continued persistently. Overwhelmed by fear, I decided to leave the room and hide in the darkness of the living room. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the doorbell rang again. My unease turned into outright dread. I tried to convince myself that the woman was harmless, but when the doorbell rang repeatedly, my nerves were on edge. I finally decided to check again, but this time it wasn't a woman. Instead, a man stood outside, looking younger but with a disheveled appearance. He claimed to be the son of the woman I just seen, explaining she had dementia, and wandered off. Feeling a pang of guilt, I told him she might be in my backyard and let him check. But when I looked out the back window, expecting to see him searching, I found nothing, no sign of him or his mother. The whole situation felt increasingly bizarre. Later that night, as I lay in bed with the TV on for background noise, the tapping on the window returned. I hesitated but eventually peeked through the blind. To my horror, I saw the same woman outside, now holding a kitchen knife and tapping it against the glass. My blood ran cold, and I quickly shut the blind and retreated to my bed, trying to convince myself it was all a nightmare. Then came a barrage of doorbell rings, 4 times in quick succession. The clinking on the window had stopped, and the whole scenario felt like it was spiraling into a terrifying ordeal. I chose to ignore the doorbell, hoping the intruders would just leave. I waited in the dark, my anxiety mounting, until the sounds finally ceased. The next morning, I recounted the events to my father. He reassured me that I did the right thing by not opening the door. Everyone agreed that it sounded like a potential robbery attempt. While it was possible that the woman did have dementia and the man was genuinely concerned, the whole encounter seemed too calculated. Why did he want to enter the house? How did he know about the woman at my door? And why didn't he search the backyard as he was told? A week later, something happened that brought the whole ordeal back to mind. My friend Cody had asked me to watch his Pomsky Theo. Theo was barking incessantly at something outside, so I went to the back door to let him out. As I approached, I realized someone was trying to open the door from the outside. Through the screen, I saw an unfamiliar, scruffy man staring back at me. He asked if I had seen Melissa, Cody's younger sister. The man looked to be in his mid-50s and was filthy. not someone who seemed likely to be associated with someone in their 20s. I told him to leave immediately, mentioning the security cameras. He left right away, but Cody later confirmed that neither her nor her sister recognized the man. The experience was unsettling and it left me shaken. The fact that this stranger targeted a place where he had no connection and tried to gain entry through a back door was deeply disturbing. It made me realize just how crucial it is to keep doors locked, to always be cautious of anyone who seems out of place. When things hit the fan with my parents, I had to scramble for a new place to live. I was desperate and crashing on friends' couches wasn't a long-term solution. I scoured every roommate and apartment app I could find, hoping to stumble upon something decent. That's when I came across an ad from a guy named Luke. He was renting out a room in his 3-bedroom, 1-story house for $1,200 a month. It sounded like a great deal, especially since he mentioned he'd often be out, leaving the place almost entirely to me. The only catch were some firm house rules: no parties, no large gatherings, no drinking in the living room, and absolutely no access to the basement. The rules seemed reasonable enough, and when I went to check out the place, it was exactly what I needed. Luke, however, struck me as a bit of a recluse. He was quiet and awkward, stumbling over his words. His nervous demeanor was unsettling, but didn't raise immediate red flags. The house itself was in great shape, with a spacious open floor plan. The bedroom was already furnished, and he even handed me a key to lock my door when he wasn't around, which felt like a nice touch. But things quickly grew strange. Despite his claim of being out most of the time, his car was always in the driveway. At night, I started hearing odd noises, footsteps, doors creaking, banging sounds coming from the basement. One night, when I ventured out to use the bathroom, I noticed the basement door was ajar. Peering down the stairs, I saw a dim light flickering from below and heard disturbing banging noises. Then Luke appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his face twisted into an annoyed scowl. He told me to shut the basement door, and I complied. Though the whole encounter left me feeling uneasy, things took a darker turn when I came home to find my bedroom door unlocked. I always kept it locked, and some of my belongings seemed to have been rifled through. My clothes were no longer neatly stacked, and the closet door was slightly ajar. Confronting Luke about this felt urgent, but when I knocked on his door, he didn't answer. His car was in the driveway, so he had to be home. My frustration grew eerie, but I let it go for the moment. Later, as I was unwinding in my room, I heard a door to Luke's room open. Seizing the chance, I went to confront him. I caught him just as he was about to leave the house. When I asked him if he had entered my room, he denied it with a blank stare and claimed I had the only key. He hastily left, leaving me alone more alarmed and confused. That night, I decided to investigate the basement myself. With Luke's car gone, I ventured downstairs, flashlight in hand. The basement was musty and small, with an unpleasant odor that grew stronger as I approached a locked door in the corner. I did not dare open it. Instead, I quickly scanned the room, finding nothing of note, and went back upstairs. The real shock came the following morning. I awoke to find Luke leaning over my bed, staring at me in the dim light. My scream shattered the silence, and he responded with a shushing gesture, asking if I had been in a basement. I was horrified and demanded to know how he got into my locked room. He didn't answer, instead simply stating that I should find other living arrangements before exiting. Panicked and shaken, I packed up my things immediately. I wasn't about to stay another night. I banged on his door, demanding half of my rent money back. Luke's response was unsettling as his presence. He handed me a small stack of 100 bills through a crack in the door. I grabbed the cash and fled, spending that night in my car. The next day, I returned to my parents' house. I explained the bizarre and frightening ordeal, and to my surprise, they were more welcoming than they had ever been. I stayed with them for a while before moving out again, but our relationship had mended. The whole experience taught me to be extremely cautious when choosing a roommate. Trust your instincts and always do thorough checks. Some red flags aren't always easy to spot until it's almost too late. During my junior year of college, I moved into an off-campus student apartment building. My new roommate, assigned by the school, was a guy named David. At first, he seemed like a genuinely nice guy, friendly, polite, and always smiling and engaging in small talk. But it didn't take long for oddities to surface. It started subtly. David seemed unusually interested in my personal life. often lingering in my room and preying into my belongings with a familiarity that felt off. I initially brushed it off as harmless curiosity, but his behavior grew increasingly unsettling. Strange noises began to emanate from his room late at night. Muffled talking, shuffling sounds. I told myself it was just him watching TV or talking on the phone, but deep down something felt wrong. One sleepless night, driven by the eerie noises, I decided to investigate. I crept down the hallway, my heart pounding, and pressed my ear against David's door. I could hear him whispering to himself in a low, indecipherable murmur. Then, just as abruptly the whispering stopped, the silence was suffocating until David's voice pierced through it, calling my name. Panic surged through me. Did he know I was outside his door? I quickly retreated to my room, unable to shake the feeling of dread. The next day, the unsettling noises persisted, heightening my paranoia. David's behavior grew even more peculiar. Furtive glances, odd movements. One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of whispering right outside my door. I pressed my ear against it again, and as before, the whispering ceased abruptly. David's voice called my name once more. This time, I responded, but he only walked away, leaving me increasingly disturbed. The following night, I was again awakened by the sound of my bedroom door closing and David's footsteps fading down the hallway. Frustration and fear reached their peak. I decided it was time to confront David about his apparent sleepwalking, asking if he had any sleep disorders. He hesitated, but admitted he sometimes sleepwalks. I was not convinced though. Determined to uncover the truth, I knew I had to search David's room for clues. So I waited until he was out and I sneaked into his room, rifling through drawers and closets with mounting urgency. Just as I was about to give up, I discovered a small, inconspicuous drawer hidden at the back of his closet. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. Inside were dozens of photographs, most of them showing me asleep, taken from various angles, some so close I could see individual pores and strands of hair. Alongside my images were pictures of another young man, presumably his previous roommate. A wave of nausea washed over me as I realized the horrifying truth. David had been secretly photographing me while I slept. The invasion of privacy was beyond disturbing. I knew I needed to act, but confronting David directly was too dangerous. Fearing for my safety, I took a photo of the disturbing evidence and pocketed a few of the pictures. The next day, I presented the evidence to the students' house and department. They were shocked and assured me they would handle the situation. I was quickly reassigned to a new apartment with a more typical roommate. I never saw David again, and the incident remained a haunting memory. Years later, I still shudder at the thought of those chilling photographs and David's unnerving whispering. I never discovered who the other man in the photos was, perhaps David's previous victim, but I'll never know. This experience taught me to trust my instincts and be cautious about who I live with, as some horrors are more real than we ever want to believe. At 23 years old, I found myself in a new state for work and in need of an affordable place to stay. Despite my parents' reservations, I posted roommate requests on every site I could think of: Facebook, Craigslist, Twitter, and even a local subreddit. A man named Rob reached out through Facebook offering a room in his house. His pictures seemed normal enough, and our FaceTime call confirmed that the place was decent, a modest house in town, just a short drive from my new office. Rob's initial friendliness seemed genuine. He gave me a virtual tour of his home and assured me he owned it outright. The house was in a convenient location and his terms were fair. Everything seemed to fall into place seamlessly, so I decided to move in a week later. Rob greeted me outside when I arrived, handing me a key. The first thing I noticed was his height. He was quite short, eye level with me. He helped me carry in my things and showed me to my room, which was already furnished. He explained that a previous tenant had recently moved out and that I was free to replace any items as I saw fit. The day was spent unpacking and getting settled. Rob made an effort to be welcoming, though I didn't sense anything particularly unsettling yet. The following day, he offered to drive me around town to familiarize me with the area. While I appreciated the gesture, I was hesitant about spending more time with him. Rob suggested lunch, but I wasn't hungry. He proposed drinks instead, which I declined, stating I didn't drink on work nights. His insistence felt oddly persistent, and I sensed a shift in his demeanor when I repeatedly turned him down. He became noticeably quiet and withdrawn, which left me feeling uneasy. As the week progressed, I noticed something disconcerting. When I returned home after one day, I discovered that my laundry hamper had been tampered with. My clothes were not as I had left them, and a pair of my underwear was missing. My heart raced with an uncomfortable thought. Could Rob be involved? I didn't want to jump to conclusions or confront him just yet, but the absence of a lock on my bedroom door made me uneasy. I bought a lockable doorknob and installed it while Rob was out, planning to explain my actions to him later. That night, I was jolted awake by banging on my bedroom door. Rob's voice called my name, clearly agitated. Terrifyingly, I decided to stay silent, pretending to be asleep. Rob's angry demands were muffled, but his frustration was palpable. The next morning, I was bombarded with texts from Rob insisting we needed to talk about the doorknob. I responded, apologizing and explaining that I felt safer with privacy. Rob's tone was cold and demanding, insisting that the old doorknob be reinstalled. His reaction was unnerving. How could he know about the change? Reluctantly, I removed the new doorknob and reinstalled the old one. The situation grew even more sinister when a young woman arrived at my door. While Rob was out, she warned me to leave immediately, revealing that Rob had multiple restraining orders from different women and was known for being a dangerous stalker. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to believe the gravity of what she was saying. She assured me she'd help me in any way she could and gave me her contact information before leaving. With her help, I found a new place across town, an available studio apartment. As I packed my belongings and prepared to move, I texted Rob, fabricating a story about a family emergency that required me to leave. When Rob returned, I told him I was moving out and requested a refund of my payment. He agreed to return the money after he visited the bank, which provided some relief. An hour later, Rob knocked on my door again, asking if anyone had warned me about him. I lied, insisting I knew nothing. His demeanor shifted from curious to suspicious, but I stuck to my story. That night, I woke in terror to find Rob sitting at the end of my bed, his presence like a nightmare made flesh. He covered my mouth and whispered to me, saying, "I know someone said something to you." His touch was both chilling and invasive as he tried to calm me. Claiming he meant no harm, I scrambled out of bed and fled to the door, while Rob's enraged shouts followed me. I ran outside, dialing 911, and hid in the bushes until the police arrived. The officers questioned Rob and listened to my account of the events. They observed his attempts to appear normal, but one officer discreetly informed me that Rob had been arrested before for similar incidents. Despite Rob's denial of wrongdoing, I managed to retrieve my belongings with the police's help. I insisted on getting my money back, which he begrudgingly provided. After a harrowing night at a hotel, I moved into the studio apartment the next day. The experience left me shaken and profoundly cautious. I vowed never to live with a man I didn't know intimately again. The ordeal served as a harsh reminder of how quickly situations can escalate and the importance of trusting one's instincts when it comes to personal safety.